Chapter 80, The Moviegoer. He was a younger man back then. A man in his mid-20s, a young man that didn't seem to be going in much of a direction in his life. He was a dark-haired, dark-eyed, fair-skinned fella that kept his hair slicked back with lard, intended to sometimes wear glasses to fix his slight nearsightedness. He had very bulky features even though he only weighed at 175 pounds and stood at 5'10". He was a dapper-looking young gent that had had his moments of attracting young gals. But then when his modesty would set in, he'd lose some of their interest. But still could fare well with them, but as long as they were simple and modest like he was, and not looking for some Cary Grant to sweep them off their feet. As long as they weren't looking for that, they might be content with what they got. Sam was his name, but in his neighborhood, everyone pretty much called him by his nickname, Weezer. And he was given that nickname because anytime he started laughing hard and deep, he'd make a wheezing sound that was so loud and intense, it would make all his friends hold their hands over their ears, looking like they wanted to make a run for it. Sam was also a bit of a hot-tempered fella, and he never particularly liked going by that nickname of his. Actually, he didn't particularly like being called anything at all. And then there was periods when his temper would get the best of him, and he'd end up getting into fights with all the other boys on the block, getting into a bunch of mess more than he was willing to deal with. Those days he spent most of his time idly living by, working on and off on his father's corner barber shop, tending to the gents coming in to get a nice clean shave while reading their morning papers. Sam, although, was terrible at his work, since he didn't care much for it, and his father didn't trust him much to do any of the men's hair, since he didn't seem to know much of a difference from an off-center part to a bowl cut. Cutting hair was just cutting hair to him, but his customers wouldn't see that way. They'd come in asking to get that look Errol Flynn or Clark Gable had in that movie, and Sam would respond by throwing his hands up into the air and telling them to wait for his father to come by and take over. The fact was, he didn't care much about his mundane day job, and neither did he care much about his mundane life. He was a directionless man who felt like life was some type of waiting game, a long, very long stretch of time of nothing ever happening, until something did. A game of waiting for something better, an opportunity to be had, a moment to step out and a time to do so and shine. This was already after the invasion of Pearl Harbor. Just about all his friends had enlisted in either the Army, Navy, or Marines, except for him. Back in 1941, when it had happened, Sam was a young man feeling exactly what all the other boys were feeling in his neighborhood. For now had come the time that Sam felt he'd been waiting for. His moment to step up and be a part of something glorious. America was now drawn into the war, and this was his moment to go someplace, to do something, and to become somebody. The only problem was his father had objected to all of it. Another world war, and he forbid the idea of seeing his only son take part in a war that he felt had nothing to do with them. America has no business in Europe again, old Joe would say. And what struck Sam a bit odd was he couldn't understand why he'd feel that way, since the old man had already served his own time in the last great one. His father was a former doughboy, sergeant, and Sam felt that if the old man was good enough to make sacrifices, so could he, and so should he. But then again, there was something else about the old sergeant that made Sam think he had his hidden reasons. Man would sometimes fall into episodes. Sometimes while he was working trimming a man's hair in the shop, it would happen. All his former clients knew about it and knew the details as well. So whenever his father asked him to be excused, they'd say, "Don't worry, Joe. Just come back when you're ready." Then his father would step to the back as his face would start convulsing. Joe's mouth would start opening, closing shut violently. And there was that one time the convulsions were so bad that when it happened, the pressure was so intense that Joe had managed to dislocate his jaw and had to be rushed to the hospital. Of course, Joe always felt these episodes coming beforehand, so there was never the worry that he might start convulsing right at the moment of cutting a man's hair with a pair of scissors at hand. Joe would just excuse himself. He'd step back to have his episode, and he'd return like nothing had happened when he was finished. It was almost very routine-like, and as disturbing of a scene of the episodes were, for any of the new customers, for everyone else had become as routine and commonplace as watching a man drinking a glass of water. Eventually, one day, out of the blue, Sam had asked his father about the story of what exactly had happened that had started all this. And the old doughboy then turned around and had straight up told him the story without even a moment of hesitation or of reserve or to reflect. He said it had all begun when he had to bayonet a German soldier in the face at the Third Battle of Odyssey. Ever since then, thinking back to that moment would make him break out as he did. And as Joe had told him, Sam, his story, what felt very off-putting of his story was how plainly and simply had told him this. Not one emotion was expressed on his face, nor did Joe express any sense that it even mattered. At that time, Sam would spend most of his time and hours doing whatever his directionless mind deemed fit. There hadn't been much else Sam had been interested in partaking in his life, except partaking in the war. So now Sam had to bear with the weight until another chance was to present itself. Usually on most occasions, he'd make it a routine to go to the movie house to see the newsreels about the war over there and all that he was missing out on. Sometimes also to catch a cartoon as well, usually a Warner Brothers or Disney cartoon, and he enjoyed these moments. Not for the cartoons themselves, him sitting around watching what an 8-year-old would be interested in. No, the whole audience would be full of children. And if the cartoon was about the war, what Sam would then find entertaining was how the kids would react. What's a character would pop up looking like a Jap or some crowd. The kids would start booing and hissing and throwing eggs and tomatoes at the screen. And yes, sir, you heard that correctly. They were actually bringing eggs and tomatoes to the movie house just to see the same war propaganda cartoon as Sam was over and over again, just for this simple reason alone. And they'd make a whole lot of noise, hooting and hollering, and make a whole lot of mess while at it. Although the owner of the theater didn't seem to mind much, actually he more or less encouraged it. The only trouble he had to then deal with would come from the ushers, complaining about the mess all those little rascals would leave behind, which of course was their job to clean up. Good thing my pops isn't a theater owner. What a raw and lousy deal that would be for me, I tell you. Thought Sam in an aisle, all the way in the back, smoking a Chesterfield cigarette. Ha! Stupid kids. All this hoopla for what? A cartoon of some rabbit standing and talking like a man, getting all silly with a character that's supposed to represent a crowd. Sometimes a little too silly. A little too... Am I the only one noticing it? Well, whatever. At least these kids have the right attitude for this. Better attitude than most people, I know. Personally, the young man didn't really mind all that much, being the only adult at the movie house, for he found it entertaining, watching children acting the way they did, so playfully and passionately, and completely invested in some doodled-up rabbit, mouse, or duck on screen. And Sam would then sort of feel like he missed those days, missed that age, back when he'd also feel and act that way, so passionately about matters before his directionless days began. I wouldn't be this way now, feeling all weary all the time, if I was over there. And at my age, I really should be. Sam just felt like he was being left out, and he dreaded the thought of what his friends would say or think when they'd return from the war and find out they had all answered the call of duty, and how he hadn't. How everyone else had enlisted except for Sam. They had gone to fight tooth and nail to make a difference in the world, and all Sam had done was sit idly by in some movie house watching cartoons with children. So embarrassing, though. Then as the newsreels would begin, he'd see the updates, the stories coming directly from the Western Front. It seemed like men were dying in the thousands over there. Of course, this was what Sam was getting from the newsreels, reading in between the lines, since he couldn't get much from what that transatlantic accent, a phony baloney accent you see some of the top drawer assholes like to teach themselves to speak. Couldn't get much from it from what it was saying in the newsreels, trying to sound so conniving and cheerful about everything, as if nothing could ever go wrong. I mean, there's a war on. So pardon me for my sarcasm and criticism, but I don't see how that voice can be that way. Making it sound like we're gonna win the war with apple pies, baseball, and Betty Grable's supple ass. Yeah, I don't see what's with the commotion over the legs of this dame here. Personally, if you want me to win some war for her, that ass of hers is what's really gonna get me up and moving. Thought Sam as he enjoyed a moment there. Then fell in with why he had gone in there in the first place, as they started showing images of Nazi-occupied Germany. And in this time of the world, watching those black and white reels were a very unnerving experience, especially for Sam, watching how there was an entire nation led by likes of madmen that were wanting to wage war with the rest of the world. They'd show the marches, they'd show the flags, and they showed that devil of a man the Charlie Chaplin mustache, which Sam used to remember how his father used to have one, as most people in the neighborhood did. That is until that man took power and began making his speeches. Then, just about everyone in the neighborhood that had one shaved it off immediately. And in the following day, practically. Looks stupid and silly as hell on him. Though, if you ask me, also part of me feels like I can't take him too seriously, but... And as silly as it seemed on the surface, as silly as they all seemed with all their marching and Sieg Heilen in German, the case still was. They were the biggest threat the world had ever known until then. And as Sam saw more and more of them over the years, the reality of what they had to offer had begun to seriously set in and seriously terrify him. Seeing into them and seeing into the eyes of their Führer, Sam's mind had begun to grasp the truth of them. How they were real and out there and had form as much as he did. Those eyes of theirs, they had a bloody tale to tell. Their Führer's eyes also had a bloody tale to tell. And as Sam would sometimes catch a glimpse of him in the reels, he'd look into his eyes. He'd then feel the devil's true presence, unflinchingly, unnervingly, unrelentingly, looking back. How can anyone like that reach so much power? How can he? How can he? What is wrong in the world that would allow that man to seem so right to so many? Sam dreaded the idea that they might win and maybe even get so far as to lay their blitzkrieg on the doorsteps of America. The idea of those maniacs marching up and down his hometown streets would scare Sam. And what frustrated him the most now was how he was denied the chance to do anything he could to stop them. What the hell am I doing here? I should be over there like everyone else is. Why is the old man trying to make me bring shame into our name? A giant part of Sam called out for him to ignore his father's words and go ahead and sign himself up, no matter what the old man's opinion would then be. But deep down, Sam couldn't disobey him like that. He respected the old man gravely, and he at least felt like he needed to honor his words. Whatever his reasons were, as convoluted as they seemed to Sam, he felt obliged to stick by them. So now I do nothing but wait and wait for I don't know what. Everyone is going to think I'm a coward for not going, everyone. And there's not a damn thing I can do about it. Sam. Huh? Who? Sam. What? Who are you? You're a grown man, way past the age of 20. Yeah, I am. So what? So, why don't you? You're an adult, old enough to make your own decisions. If you feel that strongly about the war, about making a difference, about doing the right thing, then why don't you? Huh? Who are you again? Never mind all that. Why don't you? I can't. Why can't you? My father won't allow it. You're a grown man, able to make your own decisions. So? So in the end, it's not his decision to make, it's yours. You have the right to make that. And honestly, I'm sure he might see it differently if he saw how strong your convictions were. All right, enough. I don't know who the hell you are, but I know my father, and no. Sam, you're making shut up, Hughes. I said no. He'd never allow it, and that's final. Plus what? I can't. Why can't you? Sam then, at the movie house, watching the newsreels, saw another glimpse into their viewer's eyes, unflinchingly, unnervingly, unrelentingly, glimpsing back. And then, as Sam felt his reasons why, what are you saying? You saying I'm a coward? You calling me a stinking no good lousy coward? Well, fuck you. Fuck you, buddy. Whoever the hell you... Sam then got up and left the movie house, as he realized he was no longer able to stand the embarrassment of it all.